This is Bill Brady doing another video for the Kingship course. This one is a part of the corporate group journey category playlist. And this particular video is about deacons caring for widows in a citywide ecclesia. I've been going through a list of functions that a citywide ecclesia has, and one of them is to take care of believing widows. And in the most recent recording, we talked about the appointment of the first deacons in Acts chapter 6 in the citywide ecclesia in Jerusalem. Now we're going to take a look at Paul's instructions to Timothy on how to take care of widows in a citywide ecclesia. Paul, of course, was an apostle, and Timothy was Paul's son that Paul has trained up as an apostle. And he has sent Timothy back to an ecclesia that Paul had spent a lot of time in and had now left and gone on to do his work in other places. But he sent Timothy back to appoint deacons, appoint elders, and one of the functions of the deacons is to take care of the believing widows. So this is something that you probably have never thought much about happening in a citywide ecclesia, because as part of the church, this just wasn't done. I mean, we're all part of countries that are basically welfare states. I mean, they take care of the poor, right? So in other words, the nation, the country, the USA or Canada or whatever, has the job of taking care of its poor. But the biblical thing is that the citywide ecclesia has the job of taking care of its own believing poor, not everybody else is poor. And the first rule, of course, as I've mentioned before, is if you don't work, you don't eat. So nobody's being given a free handout, as unfortunately happens often in the welfare state. Nobody's required to actually have to work to be given money by the state. But in the citywide ecclesia, nobody gets a handout. No one gets a helping hand up unless they're working. If you don't work, you don't eat. So that's one of the things to keep in mind here. Now, I want to take you to the passage in 1 Timothy where Paul gives instructions to Timothy about how to take care of the elders in whatever citywide ecclesia this was. I don't happen to know. I'm going to read you the passage, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Honor widows who are really widows, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. This is 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 through 16 in the New King James Version. Now, she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. But refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast aside their first faith. And the footnote says, solemn promise, first solemn promise. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Therefore, I desire that younger widows may marry, bear children, manage the house, and give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some have already turned aside after Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them. Let's start that again. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, the widows, and do not let the church, the ecclesia, be burdened that it may relieve those who are really widows. Okay, so we have quite a lot in here, and this is something you probably haven't thought about and maybe not of particular interest to you unless you actually are in leadership in a citywide ecclesia and had never thought that this is something that's your responsibility. I talked a little bit about this in the previous video. You don't have a responsibility to the widows, all widows in the city that you're in. And Paul limits your responsibility to the ones who are really widows. So what's he mean? Well, if a widow has children or grandchildren, then the widow's grandchildren or grandchildren are to uh, live out their faith and take care of their mother or grandmother or mother-in-law or grandmother-in-law, and so repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. So the ecclesia doesn't have to take care of the widows. They have somebody else to take care of them. Now, she who is really a widow and left alone, trusts in God. And so somebody who's just a widow is all by herself. She's got nobody but her and God to take care of her, to feed her. We're talking about food here now, which is a basic necessity of life. And she then trusts in God and continues in supplication and prayers night and day. So she's an intercessor, not just for herself, but for others too. She has the time to be an intercessor. Now, Paul contrasts this with the widows that are just having a good time. Uh, and these aren't the ones that the ecclesia is supposed to take care of. And Paul makes this statement. He says, if anyone does not provide for his own, that being the widow, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So someone who's not taking care of their own family, widows in their own family, is someone who's worse than an unbeliever. Now, he sets some guidelines for what widows the ecclesia is actually going to take care of. So the ones that have their own family to take care of them, the ecclesia doesn't take care of. And the ones that are under 60, the ecclesia doesn't take care of them. They are Paul's instruction to them is get married. If you're young enough to have children, take care of a house, be a housewife. We're not talking about people that will be CEOs of a corporation here. So I do understand that women do have work outside the house. But in that culture, that wasn't the case. And someone who needs to be taken care of by the ecclesia isn't someone who is retired as a CEO or is still functioning as a CEO or even has a job in a corporation or et cetera, et cetera. You understand what I'm saying? And then Paul, so he says, under 60, the ecclesia doesn't take care of them. Over 60, yes, the ecclesia might take care of them. Then he starts making a list of characteristics of the people, the kind of widows that the ecclesia will take care of. One who has been the wife of one man. Now, I don't think that means you can't have been divorced legitimately. I think that means that you're not a bigamist, is what I think. That's my personal opinion. Well reported for good works, has brought up children, has lodged strangers, taken strangers in the house, washed the saints' feet, relieved the afflicted, has diligently followed every good work. So she's not just someone who's a professed Jesus with their words. This is someone who's doing the works of a believer, of a disciple. And so he says, don't take care of younger widows, because there's going to be a solemn promise that's made by this woman. It seems to be that she's going to stay in this position, not get married, or not go be a busybody. So this isn't just so that the widow can now have time to be able to go from house to house and be a gossip and a busybody. No, this is so because she's too old to have children, and nobody's going to marry her at this point. Unlikely that someone's going to marry her at this point. So she really needs someone to take care of her. And in this case, the ecclesia takes care of her. And so Paul ends this: if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, take care of them, and do not let the ecclesia be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. So Paul recognizes that the ecclesia only has so much money going around to buy food for widows, and the money should go to buying food for those who can't take care of themselves, don't have anybody else to take care of them, are old enough that they can't just get married and function as a wife. These are the ones that the ecclesia should take care of, and also the ones that are actually going to be praying day and night rather than just having a good time, because now they don't have to be concerned about where the next meal is going to come from. Okay, Now, how does this relate to deacons? This relates to deacons because the first mention of deacons in Acts chapter 6 is about deacons serving the food to the widows. Two groups of widows, which I think I got wrong last time. These were Jews that had a Hebrew culture and Jews that had a Greek culture. In other words, Jews that read the Hebrew scriptures and Jews that read the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. It wasn't Jews and Gentiles, they were all Jews. But they were two cultures of Jews. And the initial complaint was that the apostles in Jerusalem were serving tables and taking better care of the ones that read the Hebrew scriptures than the ones that read the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. That was the initial complaint. Okay. So apostles need to do the job of apostles. That's why deacons were put in place. And what is the deacon's job? Well, the primary one mentioned in scripture is feeding the widows. Now, there may be other jobs that they do too, but that's the primary one. So Paul's instruction about widows is actually part of his instruction to the deacons, to Timothy, about what the deacons are supposed to do. Which widows are the deacons supposed to feed, and which widows are the deacons not supposed to feed? And again, bottom line, if you don't work, you don't eat. So someone that's just having a good time because they don't have to be concerned about their food now, where their food's going to come from, that's not at all what this is for. This is for people that are doing good works and continue to do works. Widows that have done good works while they were married and now are continuing to do good works. They're intercessors praying for their own needs, but probably praying for everybody else too. And they're going to be on this list, and they have to take a pledge that they're going to stay on this list and continue to do this work. And Paul is disappointed, more than disappointed, with widows that get on the list and then decide to get off. And aren't doing this any longer because apparently there really was a need for this group of women to do this work. They were going to be being on this list was not just getting fed; it was signing up for a full-time job. I'm suspecting that this was a group of intercessors available for the City-wide Ecclesia is one of the major things, because these widows that are put on the list are prayer warriors already. Now, she who was really a widow and left alone trusts in God. So she's got to trust in God. She's learned how to, just between her and God, get everything that she needs to be able to live as a widow. And that's really quite something. Trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers day and night, night and day. So this is an intercessor. This is someone who prays. This is one who walks the walk, does the works, and is worthy at 60 years old to be fed by the ecclesia, but not just based upon her past works. She's going to continue to do these works now that she's on the list, and the ecclesia is going to benefit from this as well. Okay, so we've covered this topic, and I'll then go on to talk more about the appointment of deacons in the next recording that I do. Okay, so that's enough on this for now. And I recognize that many of you are not going to be really interested in this until you actually have responsibility. Maybe you're an elder or you're an apostle in leadership with respect to a citywide ecclesia. This then will be very much of interest to you.